In today's video, we uncover the chilling mystery of a young woman who went to bed one night and was never seen again. One college student didn't come home from a friend's house in the middle of the night while everyone else was sleeping in the room next door. Strange things were not seen or heard, but she wasn't there in the morning. The police were called right away, and the case became the city's most talked about story right away. After following thousands of leads, detectives finally found the shocking truth that shook the whole country to its core. Brianna Dennison was born in Reno, Nevada on March 29, 1988. It was where she grew up with her parents and younger brother. When she was 6, her father suddenly died. The death hurt the whole family, but it made Brianna love her mom even more, and her mom did everything she could to help. Her family also liked to go on trips. Brianna saw a lot of Europe. She went to Japan and even spent a year as a student exchange student in Italy. She went to California to attend Santa Barbara City College after finishing high school. She chose to become a child psychologist because she had always wanted to work with kids. Not long after moving to Santa Barbara, she made friends right away and began dating a guy. Brainy, then 19, took a break from college in the winter of 2008 and went back to Reno to spend time with her family and friends. That Friday, January 18th, she went to her best friend's house with another friend to spend the weekend with them. They planned their days so that they could ski during the day and go to shows and nightclubs at night. Bryn was going to see one of her favorite bands perform live on January 19th, but she got sick and couldn't go. Brianna decided she didn't want to miss it because her mom told her to go anyway. After a few hours, she left the show early to go back to her friend's house and try to keep her cold from getting worse. Even though the house wasn't far away, she didn't want to walk because it was cold. When she saw a car leave the parking lot, she flagged it down and asked the driver to take her somewhere. He agreed and she got home. She then began to wait for her friends to return from the show. Around 3:30 in the morning, they showed up. Before going to bed, the girls talked for a while. Brianna texted her boyfriend around 4:30 and then went to sleep. Brianna fell asleep on the couch in the kitchen while her friends slept in the next room. Brianna was not there when they woke up at 9 a.m. and began making breakfast. They didn't think much of it at first because they thought she had just moved into the bedroom because the door was shut. After about 40 minutes, one of them knocked on her door to wake her up for breakfast, but no one answered. She knocked again, but nothing happened. When she finally opened the door, the room was empty. The friends looked through the whole house and quickly found that Brianna wasn't there. But her phone, purse, clothes, and even shoes were still there. It all felt wrong. They couldn't think of a reason she would go outside in just a t-shirt since it was very cold. When they called her mom, she had no idea where her daughter was. She ran over right away. Between then and now, the friends saw something very scary. A few small red marks that looked a lot like blood were found on Brianna's pillow where she had been sleeping. Her friends were so scared that they called the cops, who arrived almost right away. There were no signs of a fight inside the house, but a few things stood out right away. Brianna's blanket that she had been sleeping under was lying a few feet away from the couch, and the toy bear that she had been using as an extra pillow was gone. The friends told the cops they never locked the front door, which was right in front of where Brianna had been sleeping. There were also no signs of forced entry. From the very beginning, police began to lean towards the idea that she had been taken. They still couldn't figure out how someone could have taken her without waking up the two girls sleeping in the next room. It didn't make sense for her to walk out into the cold in just a t-shirt. Based on the pillow Brianna had been using, forensic experts quickly came up with the most likely reason for what happened. First, they were sure that her blood was on it. Then they came to the conclusion that the killer had probably slammed her face into the pillow hard enough to keep her from crying. The crime lab also swabbed the front door handle and found DNA from a man that wasn't in the system that was not known. Since there were no more useful hints inside the house, police searched the whole city. They started going door to door in the neighborhood and asking guys to give DNA samples on their own. At the same time, detectives looked through Brianna's phone and found a bunch of texts from her boyfriend. He sent her a bunch of mean messages the night she disappeared, and her friends said they were about to break up. He was a suspect for a short time until investigators found out he was in another state at the time and couldn't have been involved in the kidnapping. Brianna's absence was the biggest news story in the city from the very beginning, and it quickly spread across the whole country. Her picture was on a lot of billboards, and the story was always being covered in the local news. The cops got about 3,000 DNA samples from people in the area, but that much work was too much for the city's crime lab to handle. The government asked the people for help and quickly raised $150,000 to pay for more tests. In the end, experts were able to look at all of the samples, but none of them matched the DNA of the person thought to be the kidnapper. As soon as the FBI joined the case, they set out to find the suspect. First, police looked into the man who had driven Brianna home that night because they thought he might have come back later to take her. When the news said that police wanted to talk to him, the man came forward, gave a DNA sample, and gave a good reason for not being responsible. This took him off the police's list of suspects. A man who lived across the street from Brianna's friend's house gave them another tip. He was sitting in his living room and told the cops that he hadn't slept that night. At about 5 a.m., he saw a shadow move in front of his window and then heard someone trying to open his front door. For a while, nothing worked to stop the noise, but at first, he didn't think much of it. He thought it was probably just a drunk person who thought his house was theirs. The search activities got bigger every day. People volunteered to join the cops. Drones flew over the area, and search dogs were used by police to look in hard-to-reach places like fields, woods, and drainage ditches. But none of it got us anywhere. Detectives didn't think this was the suspect's first crime based on the information they had. As they looked into Reno's unexplained crimes, they quickly found two that caught their attention. Just a few months before Brianna went missing, in November 2007, an unknown man beat a college student who was 21 years old. He came up to her in the parking lot, knocked her down, pulled out a gun, and beat her up. She screamed until she could barely breathe, even though he told her to be quiet. It looked like that scared him, so he ran away and dropped a pack of condoms along the way. After a month, there was another attack. This time, the victim was a student who was 22 years old and standing outside her house when a man came up behind her and squeezed her mouth and nose, knocking her out. The truck cab is where she woke up. After a few minutes, the driver pulled over and raped her while telling her not to look at him the whole time. He drove her back to her house and told her not to turn around as she walked to the door. She called the cops right away and gave them some information. The man was white, big, and had brown arms. She also talked about his pickup truck and added a scary detail. There was a child's shoe inside. There was one more scary link between the two strikes. The person who attacked both times took the victim's pants with him. Police took DNA samples from both women, and they were found to be identical. Now, the officers working on Brianna's case asked for a match to be made between the sample and the one from the door handle. This made their worst fear come true. They were dealing with a repeat predator who liked to prey on women. Sexual abuse. After hearing about this in the news, another kid spoke up. She told the police that someone had tried to break into her house one night by pulling on the front door handle so hard that it bent. However, the intruder was unable to enter. Police made a composite sketch and profile of the suspect based on information from the other two victims. The suspect was a guy of average height, between 28 and 40 years old, with a solid muscular build. Print and TV sites in the area were sent a picture of him, along with a public appeal for help identifying him. There was a lot of fear in Reno. They knew there was a serial killer working right next door and thought it would only be a matter of time before he did it again. The sales of guns and pepper spray went through the roof and women were too scared to stay home by themselves. Investigators weren't any closer to making an arrest or finding Brianna. Even though the public was putting a lot of pressure on them, it became less likely that she was still living every day. Divers were sent to look for her body in a nearby river, and hundreds of people braved the cold to help. Also, more than 5,000 tips were sent to the police, but none of them helped them find Brianna. It went on for almost a month before someone called the cops. A worker was leaving for his lunch break on February 15th. In order to save time, he chose to go to the coffee shop by cutting through an empty lot. He saw an old Christmas tree lying in a ditch and a pair of socks sticking out from behind it as he walked. As he got closer, he saw what looked like a person. He first thought someone had dumped a mannequin. It didn't take him long to figure out it was a dead body. He called the cops right away. The body parts were sent to a medical examiner so that the name of the person and the cause of death could be confirmed. 2 sets of women's pants were lying next to the body. The victim was naked except for socks. The doctor said for sure that it was Brianna. She was strangled to death and marks on her neck showed that her killer had used knickers to do it. The doctor said Brianna was killed in the house and her body was later taken away. In other words, she had been dead since the day she went missing. 1 pair of pants belonged to Brianna's friend who hadn't even known they were stolen. The other pair, on the other hand, wasn't hers. Police think the killer left them at the spot on purpose to tease them. Also, Brianna had been sexually abused and DNA from a man was found on her body. Like we thought it would, it matched the samples from the 2 earlier attacks and the one that was on the doorknob. Everyone in the city felt sick when they heard that Brianna's body had been found. A lot of people were keeping an eye on the case because they thought she might still be alive. During the weeks that followed, police kept looking for the killer. They tried following every tip, but none of them led anywhere. A few weeks later, they chose to tell the public more about what happened and said that the killer seemed to collect his victim's pants. Investigators hoped that a family member or friend might have seen something fishy, but no useful information came in. After that, the investigation pretty much stopped, even though a lot of police were still working on it. As the weeks changed into months, they were having a hard time believing that the killer had gotten away with it. But on November 1st, almost a year after the murder, everything changed. A call came in from someone who didn't want to be named. Someone said that a friend of hers found women's knickers in her boyfriend's pickup truck a while ago. When she asked him about it, his explanation sounded very fishy. There was more. This man sold his truck and left town soon after Brianna was killed. That man was James Bella, who was 27 years old, and the cops quickly found him. James used to be in the Marines and had a lot of training in martial arts. He had worked on many building projects near the university, in the area where Brianna's friend lived, so he knew the area well. At the time of Brianna's murder, he was taking on work as a builder. As the officers dug deeper, they found out that James had a violent streak. Someone he used to date told them he hit her a lot and once almost killed someone with a knife. He also broke a dog's leg for no reason one time. Police had never taken James' DNA or charged him with anything, even after all that. As soon as the police found out he had moved back to Reno, they kept an eye on him 24 hours a day. They called him too and said they wanted to talk. James agreed to meet, but he didn't even ask what the meeting was for. Police asked him where he was the night Brianna was killed. When they talked to him the next day, James said he was at his girlfriend's house, but when they asked for a DNA sample, he flatly refused. Just then the cops went to see his ex-girlfriend and she told them his story was a lie. That night, he wasn't with her. They also found out that James was married to this woman and had a 4-year-old boy together. When the police asked the boy's mother if they could get a DNA sample from him, she said yes. The killer's DNA was almost exactly the same as the child's, which meant that the crimes were likely committed by someone in the boy's close family. With all of this proof in hand, the officers went back to James, but this time it was to arrest him. A lot of charges were brought against him because his DNA had been found in 3 different cases. He still wouldn't accept he was guilty. James was put in jail until his hearing while the police worked to build their case. They learned from James' father that he had a long past of drug abuse, which was a big reason why he was kicked out of the Marines. Detectives also found his old van. Fibers from the seat covers were tested and found to be an exact match to fibers found on the clothes of another student who had been taken and driven home. His old boss also had something to say. He said James quit his job the same day Brianna's body was found and went to live in another state. When the trial started, James' lawyer tried to say that the cases were unrelated and that each crime had its own signature. But those claims didn't hold much weight because the prosecution had a lot of proof linking James to all of them. James kept laughing and even smirking during the trial, which didn't help his case. In late May 2010, just over 2 years after Brianna's murder, the jury found him guilty on all counts. The court then had to decide what to do with him, and the death penalty was an option. James' lawyer worked hard to keep him from getting the harshest sentence. He told the judge about his client's troubled childhood and how his alcoholic father would beat him often. He also talked about how well James had behaved in jail. The judge didn't care about any of that, so James was given the death penalty. Just a few months later, he got 4 more life terms for different charges. This means that he will never be free, even if his execution never happens, which is very possible. Over the next few years, James' lawyer tried more than once to get the sentence thrown out, but each time the state Supreme Court supported the death penalty. Because of this, James is still in jail and there is no set date for his execution. Brianna's family pushed for a new law in Nevada that would require police to get DNA from anyone arrested for a violent crime after he was caught. Some people think that if there had been such a rule earlier, James would have been caught after his first attack on a student, and Brianna might not have died. It's too bad that her death wasn't the last blow to the family. It's been 10 years since she was killed, and her 19-year-old cousin has still not been found. Her folks were shocked when she told them she was leaving for another state with a new boyfriend. She then stopped answering her phone. Her family is scared that something bad happened to her and still hopes she'll come home. We are uncovering the haunting story of Shelby Thornburg, a vibrant young woman whose promising life ended in unimaginable horror. Houston, Texas, November 2015, 20-something. This is Shelby Jean Thornburg Crocker, behind the bright lights of a hotel on the side of the road. Police found more than just the evidence of a crime in her room. They also found the start of a story. Each detail and unanswered question adds to the mystery of a story with secret dangers, trust that is quickly broken, and a predator that is easy to spot. Shelby, who was 20 years old at the time, had to meet a client in the evening on November 4, 2015. When the call came in at 8 p.m., it was from that client. Records show that the client told Shelby he was on his way. Around 8:34 p.m., Shelby got another text message from the same customer. Said, "Hey, I'm here." Then Shelby sent a text message to her boss, Marcus Mark D. Johnson, 10 minutes later with the code word GUD. Marcus was in charge of finding clients for Shelby, and they came up with a way for Shelby to let Marcus know that a client had been met, paid, and was ready to do business. When Marcus got this text, it made him feel better and he didn't bother Shelby for a while. Herb would usually tell Marcus that the job was done and everything was fine after the client left. Took Marcus a long time to get that call or text though. Marcus tried to call Shelby because of this, but she didn't answer. This was strange. Because this was a planned meeting, the client had to end things and leave when the time was up. There was a limit to how long they could stay in Shelby's flat. Marcus chose to go to Shelby's flat and check on her himself. He stopped in his tracks as soon as he opened Shelby's door and walked into the living room. What he saw registered in his eyes, and it's amazing he didn't pass out from fear at that very moment. Shelby was still and lying face down on the bed in the living room. No one else was in the room with her. The client seemed to have already left. He was scared when he saw red spots on the bed and the wall next to it. Marcus quickly came to the conclusion that Shelby had been killed. Marcus rushed out of the flat right away and called 911. His first words to the receptionist when they picked up were, "Someone is dead. Someone killed my girl." He was born in Decatur, Texas on August 18, 1995. Shelby's mom had an affair with a guy named Shannon Crocker, while she was not with her partner Robert. It was during one of these times that she got pregnant. It was Shannon's mom, Leslie Jean Crocker, who told her that she was pregnant. Shannon then pretty much left her to handle the pregnancy on her own. Shelby never had a father role in her life. This was going to be very upsetting for her and the effects would last for decades. Robert also found it hard to believe that Leslie had cheated on him, since their relationship was already in bad shape. But he chose to stay with Shelby anyway, kind of like a father figure, but not really. Robert was like a father to Shelby, but sadly it was only on paper. It's safe to say that Leslie and Robert's relationship is at best messy and unstable. She was a lot younger than Robert. Robert was in his mid-20s when she had her first daughter, Christina. She was only 18. Also, the fact that Robert spent most of his time in jail instead of at home because he was abusing drugs and doing other illegal things didn't help. On the other hand, Leslie, who was raising 2 girls by herself, struggled with depression, and quickly became addicted. Leslie got in trouble with the law once for writing bad checks. For two little girls who had no one to watch them, it was just not a good place to be. Christina raised Shelby, and the two would become very close. Shelby was safe with Christina. Even when she was a little girl, she did a great job of keeping her safe from all the bad things in the world. In 2001, Leslie was found guilty of fraud. In 2004, Christina and Shelby were put into the foster system after Robert and Leslie both lost their parenting rights. After a while, Robert, who was no longer in jail, took them in. But after everything that had happened, things would never be the same for the girls again. Robert took advantage of Shelby and Christina many times. Christina was told she had to leave the house when she got pregnant and had a boy. Sadly, the past happened again. Not long after that, Shelby had to work like an adult. She got pregnant with a man who went by the name Kurt Fisher. At the time of this, he was 18 and Shelby was only 14. At about the same time, Shelby finally reported Robert to Child Protective Services and he was arrested for good. Kurt was also charged with assault and sent to jail. 9 months after that, on May 11, 2011, Shelby had a boy and named him Logan. That being said, Shelby was too young to care for a baby while she was in foster care, so she had to give Logan up for adoption. Logan was finally taken in by a loving family, and Shelby was even allowed to visit him sometimes. After about a year, though, tragedy struck again. Leslie, who was Shelby and Christina's mother, died on August 9, 2012. She was 38 years old. She wasn't the best mom, but Shelby and Christina were still heartbroken when she died. Shelby was eager to make her life better, even though it wasn't perfect. But it wasn't as easy as it seemed. Because of problems with her breathing as a child, Shelby had a lot of trouble with being overweight, which made her feel very insecure. She couldn't run outside or play with the other kids because she was afraid of having a bad asthma attack. She gained weight out of control and became severely obese because of this, but she was able to get over a lot of it later in life. Her goal was to become a nurse assistant by 2014, but once again, fate had other ideas. Unfortunately, this time the baby girl didn't make it. She got pregnant again. Shelby's emotions were hit hard by this loss, and from there she got into trouble with the law, and her mental health got worse. As a child, she had seen adults doing things in her home, and she started doing them herself. This was something she had almost avoided in the past. Now, though, the idea was much more appealing. You may remember that Shelby was unhappy with her weight and wanted to change how she looked, but those were pricey. She thought that once she knew how to do it, she would be one step closer to becoming a model. She knew that working as an adult would only last for a short time. It was her only choice because she needed money quickly. So, she went to Houston and got a job working with adults. Things quickly went bad, though. She was jailed for solicitation, and after she got out of jail, she met Marcus D. Johnson, who used the name Mark D. Marcus to treat Shelby to all the nice things in life. Marcus would take her on fancy trips to Las Vegas, Los Angeles, and the Bahamas. And Shelby and Marcus would share photos of their trips on social media. Marcus looked like Shelby's boyfriend from a third-person point of view. That wasn't the case, though. Theodore D. was Shelby's adult work manager, which meant he set up all of her meetings and customers. Marcus was deeply in love with Shelby. Marcus must have been making a lot of money because she had a lot of clients. That could be why he spent so much on her. Soon after, Marcus even moved Shelby to a nicer, safer Houston apartment building. But they quickly ran into trouble. It was hard for Marcus and Shelby to get clients because of strict security checks, and when there were no clients, there was no money. Shelby had to be moved to a less safe complex, the Conquistador Apartments, in the 7575 block of Bel Air Boulevard, by Marcus. She was put in flat 3B. Adults often worked in this area, so it wasn't safe for a young woman to be there by herself, but Shelby had to do what she had to do. Again, this was the only choice Shelby had. She mostly worked from her flat, which wasn't safe because complete strangers knew where she lived. But soon there were problems. She was caught again. The first time, she got away with it. But not this time. She knew she was going to jail for a long time, so she hired a lawyer to try to get the charges dropped or lowered. Things were not going well, and it looked like she would be locked up for a long time. That didn't happen, though. because Shelby was found dead not long after these charges were brought against her. When the cops got there, after Marcus called 911, they didn't know what to do. There were no signs of forced entry or theft, and the most worrisome thing was that there were no signs of a fight. Marcus was asked about Shelby's daily life, like who she met that night and what she did. The police now knew about the mystery client, the man who was meant to meet Shelby for business. This man was, of course, their main suspect, but there was something wrong. He was unknown. It was suspicious that they only had a phone number. The phone that was used to call Shelby was a burner phone that had been turned on before she was killed. The cops had to learn more about this man, but they also checked out the flat and swabbed it for evidence. Many questions were still unanswered, so Shelby's body was taken away for an autopsy. During this time, Christina, Shelby's sister, got the terrible news early on November 5th. Christina couldn't believe it. She didn't know all the scary details, but she did know one thing for sure. Her sister, whom she had always tried to keep safe, was dead. Soon the cops had the autopsy report, and what they found was horrifying and hard to believe. For some reason, Shelby's single wound on her neck became a big talking point in the case. The cut was a single, planned, quick, and deep slash. I won't go into graphic details. Based on the depth and intensity, it looked like the attacker put about 1,000 pounds of pressure on a specific spot. Shelby didn't have time to react or protect herself because of where she was before the attack. This is why she didn't have any hesitation or defensive wounds. There was a lot of doubt in the autopsy report. The cops thought the killer had to have had military or field training. Based on what they found, the attack wasn't sloppy, it was planned, and thought out. Other things the cops looked for in the flat were DNA, but they mostly failed. They did find used birth control packing, which made them think that Shelby and the killer touched each other, and then something went wrong. The killer was smart because they didn't leave much DNA behind. One thing was different, though. The cops found hair on Shelby's body that didn't belong to her. Shelby had long blonde hair. Some of the hair that was found was dark and short, as if it came from a man. They also found hair from women, but it could have been tainted. In any case, the cops sent these hair samples to Cody's to be tested and matched with other hair samples. Soon after, though, they came to a dead end. Not a match. Shelby's case had no leads and no movement for 5 months. Her family was having a rough time. But after 5 months, the cops finally showed one piece of evidence. CCTV footage from the lobby of the apartment building. The cops were able to figure out who was coming into the lobby and going towards Shelby's flat based on her texts with the unknown client. This video was creepy and hard to understand in every way. A man walked into the lobby at 8:34 p.m. as seen on security video. It was a light shirt with long sleeves and he was on his phone. The strangest thing was that he wore sunglasses on his face instead of his head when he was outside at night. The man walked steadily and with purpose. He looked big and tall. He was very big compared to Shelby's small size. His steps were slow and steady, like he was on a mission. He was seen going upstairs and then leaving 23 minutes later. What's amazing is that he didn't even sweat. His clothes were smooth. His glasses didn't fall off. There wasn't a hair out of place. It's hard to believe how long it took him to get in, kill, and leave. Even stranger, no one knew who he was. In adult work, clients often stay anonymous, but it's scary to not know anything about them. Marcus didn't even know the client's name, but he was ready to leave the locked room with his claimed main girl. The fake phone that was used to call Shelby was bought at a nearby Walmart a month before the murder and turned on a week before the murder. The phone was gone after that. The client had written many times online without giving their name. They were looking for small, blonde women. Shelby looked like he fit all the criteria. It had been 5 months when the police called Walmart to ask for surveillance tape. The store no longer had the video that was important. In other words, the investigation had hit a second dead end. Where did Shelby go? And who was this guy in sunglasses? There are several ideas. First, there's the hitman idea, which Shelby's family kind of backs up. You may remember that she was arrested for begging right before she was killed. She was apparently getting those charges dropped with the help of a lawyer. It is thought that she was killed on purpose. Shelby is said to have been an informant for the police and decided to testify in exchange for having her charges dropped. Someone in her line of work found out about this and hired a hitman to kill her while dressed as a customer. There is some truth to this idea because human trafficking rings in her area have been broken up more than once. The cops say those arrests have nothing to do with her death though. That's it for now. But if secret sting operations were involved, would they ever say it out loud? Most likely not. If this is true, the truth might never come out. If the name of one informant is made public, the whole investigation could fall apart. Many women may have been involved with this operation, and some of them were close to Shelby. This theory not only makes sense, but it seems very possible. That's just what I think. Some people also thought Marcus was guilty. He found her body and moved her from a safer flat to a sketchy one so he could get more guests. A lot of people thought it was odd that Marcus didn't know the client's name. He was in charge of checking out people. His best client and biggest source of income was Shelby. He was the one who should have kept her safe. After all, if he lost her, he would lose his job. First, police did look into Marcus, but they found no evidence linking him to the crime. They thought it was case closed because there was no proof linking him to anything. He should have done a better job of checking out clients, but there's no reason he would want her dead. The police strongly back the next idea, which is that someone is a serial killer. The FBI joined in too. Police think that Shelby's death fits the pattern of a serial killer. There's a chance that the client was a killer who only liked killing short, blonde women for adult work. There is evidence that the man looked for women who met these requirements. This is a common way for serial killers to work, like how people tried to copy Jack the Ripper. The cops and FBI think the killer has done many crimes and may have done them in both Louisiana and Texas. Her name is on the FBI's website as someone who may have been killed by a serial killer. It doesn't matter what the truth is, her killer is still out there and probably looking for his next target right now. As of now, the hairpieces found at the scene have not been put through the genealogy process. People are shocked. This took place in 2015, not many years ago. Even though they are pricey, progress in DNA and genetic technology could lead to a big step forward. Now it looks like all that's left is to get the money for gene DNA tests. But there may be more going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. The sister of Shelby, Christina, works very hard to keep her case going. She made a Facebook page where people can share information and talk about Shelby's life and problems. She also contacted Christina and dug deep into her death and life. Gavin even improved the video of the lobby. Really, someone should know who that is. Very little information about Shelby is known to the public. Gavin's work, and that of other true crime YouTubers and podcasters who brought this case to light, is what made it possible. Even though it's been almost 10 years, Christina still hopes that the police will solve the murder of her sister and give her the peace of mind she needs. Shelby was a person, and she didn't deserve to have her life taken that way. No matter what she did for work, whether she wanted to or not. People shouldn't keep her family in the dark or treat them badly. Everyone who has been hurt deserves justice. Not just her. Nobody should be treated badly, no matter what they do for a living or even if they do. Everyone has hopes and dreams that they can make the world a better place, or at least their own life or the life of their family. The truth is that it doesn't matter what you think about Shelby. What's important is that her killer hasn't been caught yet. Every woman who fits this description is in great danger. The Robbie family consisted of Ryan, a successful 45-year-old investment banker with penchant for Brooks Brothers suits, his second wife Mandy, a striking 38-year-old interior designer with a flair for the dramatic, and Ryan's son from his first marriage, 20-year-old Nathaniel, a college dropout with a chip on his shoulder and a history of minor run-ins with the law. To their neighbors, the Robbies appeared to be living the American dream. Ryan's career was thriving. Mandy's design business was gaining traction among Oakdale's elite, and Nathaniel, despite his academic setbacks, seemed to be finding his footing working at a local garage. Little did anyone suspect that beneath this carefully cultivated image lay a powder keg of secrets, jealousies, and dangerous desires. Ryan Robbie's first marriage to Helena, Nathaniel's mother, had been a whirlwind romance that quickly soured. Helena, a free-spirited artist, found herself stifled by Ryan's rigid lifestyle and expectations. Their arguments, once confined to hushed whispers behind closed doors, escalated into shouting matches that echoed through their home, leaving a young Nathaniel cowering in his room. The divorce, when it came, was bitter and protracted. Helena fought for full custody, painting Ryan as a cold, neglectful father. In the end, the court granted joint custody, but the damage was done. Nathaniel, then only 10 years old at the time, was torn between two warring parents. His loyalty constantly tested. Helena's subsequent move to the West Coast for her art career left Nathaniel feeling abandoned, fueling a resentment that would smolder for years to come. Ryan threw himself into his work, climbing the corporate ladder with single-minded determination. It was at a charity gala, 3 years after his divorce, that he met Mandy Rossi. She was captivating, with her raven hair and quick wit, a breath of fresh air in Ryan's staid world. Mandy saw in Ryan not just financial security, but a chance at the stable family life she'd never had growing up in foster care. Their courtship was swift, and within a year, Mandy had moved into the Robbie home. Nathaniel, now 14 and in the throes of adolescent angst, viewed his new stepmother with suspicion and hostility. Mandy's attempts to bond with her stepson were met with cold indifference at best and open hostility at worst. As the years passed, the divide between Mandy and Nathaniel grew. Ryan, eager to avoid conflict, turned a blind eye to the tension, convincing himself that time would heal all wounds. Mandy, frustrated by her inability to connect with Nathaniel, gradually withdrew, focusing on her burgeoning design career and the social circles it opened up to her. Nathaniel's teenage years were marked by rebellion, skipping classes, experimenting with drugs, and petty theft. Each incident widened the chasm between him and his father, with Mandy often caught in the crossfire. By the time Nathaniel grudgingly enrolled in the local community college, the Robbie home had become a battleground of unspoken grievances and simmering resentments, setting the stage for the explosive events to come. The catalyst for the Robbie family's unraveling came on a sweltering July afternoon. Nathaniel, having dropped out of college and now working as a mechanic, returned home earlier than usual, nursing a hangover in a foul mood. The house was quiet, Ryan away on a business trip and Mandy presumably at a client meeting. Seeking aspirin for his pounding headache, Nathaniel entered the master bedroom, a space he usually avoided. As he rummaged through the medicine cabinet, a buzzing sound caught his attention. Mandy's phone, forgotten on the nightstand, lit up with a new message. Perhaps it was the lingering effects of the previous night's indulgences, or simply a malicious impulse. But Nathaniel found himself reaching for the device. The message preview on the lock screen made his eyes widen. "Can't wait to see you later, my love." Excerpt. His stepmother's phone was locked, but this single message was a key to a Pandora's box of secrets. Over the next hour, Nathaniel sat on his parents' bed, his headache forgotten as more messages arrived, each one more incriminating than the last. He learned that the sender was one Xavier Krasinski, a name he vaguely recognized as a client of Mandy's design business. The messages painted a vivid picture of a torrid affair that had been going on for months. There were references to clandestine meetings, passionate encounters, and promises of a future together. As the reality of his discovery sank in, a mix of emotions washed over Nathaniel. There was disgust at the thought of his stepmother's infidelity, a twisted sense of satisfaction at having ammunition against the woman he'd resented for years, and beneath it all, a spark of opportunity. When Mandy returned home that evening, she found Nathaniel waiting for her in the kitchen, an unsettling smirk playing on his lips. The air was charged with tension as he casually asked about her day, his eyes glinting with newfound knowledge. Mandy, sensing something amiss, answered cautiously, unaware that her carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down around her. Nathaniel wasted no time in revealing his hand. With a casualness that belied the weight of his words, he mentioned Xavier's name, watching as the color drained from Mandy's face. He laid out what he knew, savoring each flinch and gasp from his stepmother as he recounted the details of her affair. Mandy's initial denials quickly gave way to desperate pleas as Nathaniel made his intentions clear. He wanted money, $1,000 a month in exchange for his silence. The irony wasn't lost on him. For years, he'd resented Mandy's presence in his life, and now he saw an opportunity to profit from it. Her voice shaking, Mandy tried to reason with him. She spoke of family loyalty, of the pain this would cause Ryan, of the potential to tear their lives apart. But Nathaniel was unmoved. With cold calculation, he pointed out that it was Mandy who had jeopardized their family with her infidelity. He was merely capitalizing on her mistake. The negotiations were tense, with Mandy trying to bargain the amount down and Nathaniel standing firm. In the end, faced with the prospect of losing everything, her marriage, her social standing, her carefully cultivated image, Mandy capitulated. She agreed to Nathaniel's terms, her voice hollow with defeat, as she promised to make the first payment the following day. As Nathaniel left the kitchen, a sense of power surged through him. He had the upper hand for the first time in years, and he intended to make the most of it. Mandy, left alone, her mind racing as she grappled with the magnitude of her predicament. The first payment was made in cash, handed over in a plain envelope in the garage, away from prying eyes. Nathaniel counted the bills slowly, relishing Mandy's discomfort. With a smirk, he reminded her that this was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, a new dynamic took hold in the Robbie household. On the surface, little had changed. Ryan remained oblivious, absorbed in his work. But beneath the veneer of normalcy, a current of tension crackled. Mandy walked on eggshells, her once confident demeanor replaced by nervous glances and forced smiles. Nathaniel, emboldened by his newfound power, became more openly disrespectful, knowing Mandy wouldn't dare challenge him. As summer waned, the weight of her secret and the strain of meeting Nathaniel's demands began to take their toll on Mandy. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would spiral far beyond her control. As weeks turned into months, the fragile equilibrium in the Robbie home began to crumble. Nathaniel, intoxicated by his newfound power, grew bolder in his demands. The monthly payments, once a source of smug satisfaction, now seemed paltry compared to the control he wielded over his stepmother's life. Started small, snide comments at the dinner table, thinly veiled threats disguised as innocent conversation. Nathaniel would casually mention Xavier's name in Ryan's presence, watching Mandy's face contort with panic before smoothly changing the subject. He reveled in her fear, in the way her hands would shake as she poured the wine, in the dark circles that began to form under her eyes as sleepless nights took their toll. By October, the original agreement no longer sufficed. Nathaniel cornered Mandy in the laundry room, demanding an increase to $1,500 a month. When Mandy protested, citing the difficulty of explaining the withdrawals to Ryan, Nathaniel's eyes hardened. He reminded her of the photos he'd discovered on her phone. Intimate images never meant for his eyes, and how easily they could find their way to Ryan's inbox. Mandy's world was unraveling. The stress of maintaining her secret life with Xavier, coupled with Nathaniel's escalating blackmail, was pushing her to the brink. Her design business began to suffer as she missed appointments and turned in subpar work. Clients, once charmed by her vivacity, now complained about her distracted demeanor and lack of creativity. As autumn progressed, Nathaniel's demands extended beyond money. He began to treat the house as if it were his own, throwing parties when Ryan was away on business trips, leaving Mandy to clean up the aftermath. He borrowed Ryan's prized vintage car without permission, returning it with mysterious dents and scratches. Each transgression was met with a pointed look that silenced any protest Mandy might have mustered. The power dynamic in the house had shifted dramatically. Nathaniel now ruled the roost, his every whim catered to by an increasingly desperate Mandy. She found herself walking a tightrope, trying to meet Nathaniel's demands while maintaining the facade of normalcy for Ryan. As Thanksgiving approached, bringing with it the prospect of extended family gatherings and increased scrutiny, Mandy knew something had to give. She couldn't continue like this indefinitely. With growing dread, she realized she needed help. and there was only one person she could turn to. In early December, Mandy made a decision that would set in motion a chain of irreversible events. After weeks of agonizing, she confided in Xavier about the blackmail. The meeting took place in a nondescript motel on the outskirts of town, their usual rendezvous point. As Mandy poured out the whole sordid tale, her voice cracking with emotion, Xavier's expression darkened. His initial shock gave way to a cold, calculating anger that sent a chill down Mandy's spine. What Mandy didn't know that Xavier Krasinski was not merely the successful businessman and charming lover she believed him to be. Beneath his polished exterior lay a history of violence and criminal connections that he'd carefully concealed from her. Xavier's past included a stint in prison for aggravated assault, associations with local organized crime, and a reputation for handling problems with ruthless efficiency. As he listened to Mandy's story, wheels began turning in his mind. This wasn't just about protecting their relationship anymore. It was about eliminating a threat. He assured Mandy that he would take care of everything, his tone soothing but his eyes hard as flint. Mandy, desperate for a solution and blinded by her feelings for Xavier, felt a wave of relief wash over her. Finally, she thought someone else would shoulder this burden. Over the next few days, Xavier set his plan in motion. He reached out to old contacts, gathering information on Nathaniel's habits, his workplace, his favorite haunts. He was meticulous in his planning, leaving nothing to chance. Unbeknownst to Mandy, Xavier had no intention of simply buying Nathaniel's silence or reasoning with him. In Xavier's world, problems like this were solved permanently, and collateral damage was an acceptable risk. As Christmas decorations began to appear in the windows of Oakdale's homes, Xavier made his move. He approached Nathaniel outside the garage where he worked, his demeanor friendly but his eyes cold. The conversation that followed was brief but loaded with unspoken threats. Xavier made it clear that he knew about the blackmail and that Nathaniel was playing a dangerous game. Nathaniel, however, was not as easily cowed as Xavier had anticipated. Years of resentment and the taste of power had hardened him. Instead of backing down, he sneered at Xavier, suggesting that perhaps Ryan would be interested in knowing about his wife's extracurricular activities. As Xavier walked away, his genial mask slipping to reveal a flash of genuine anger, both knew that the stakes had just been raised exponentially. The game was no longer just about money or secrets. It had become a battle of wills with potentially deadly consequences. The week before Christmas, Xavier decided to take more direct action. His warning to Nathaniel had fallen on deaf ears, and he knew that Mandy was at her breaking point under the guise of a pre-holiday drinks invitation. Xavier lured Nathaniel to a secluded area near the old mill on the outskirts of town. The winter air was crisp. He offered a substantial sum, $50,000, for Nathaniel to leave and never contact Mandy again. It was meant to be a final generous offer before resorting to more drastic measures. Nathaniel, however, had severely underestimated the danger he was in. Emboldened by months of successfully manipulating Mandy, he scoffed at Xavier's offer. In a display of youthful arrogance, he countered with an outrageous demand: $250,000, or he'd expose both Mandy and Xavier to Ryan and the entire community. What happened next was a blur of motion and violence. Xavier, his patience exhausted, lashed out with a speed and ferocity that caught Nathaniel completely off guard. The ensuing struggle was brief but brutal. Xavier's experience and ruthlessness quickly overwhelmed Nathaniel, leaving the younger man battered and bloodied on the frozen ground. As Nathaniel lay there tasting blood and fear for the first time, Xavier delivered a final warning. This was his last chance to walk away, to forget everything he'd seen and heard. The next time, Xavier promised, there would be no warnings, no offers, only consequences. Shaken and in pain, Nathaniel stumbled home that night, his mind reeling. The reality of his situation had finally hit home. He was no longer the one in control. He was in over his head, tangled in a web far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. For a brief moment, as he nursed his wounds in the solitude of his room, Nathaniel considered taking Xavier's advice and disappearing. But as the pain of his injuries gave way to a burning anger, his resolve hardened. He wasn't going to be intimidated. If anything, this attack had only strengthened his determination to see this through to the end, whatever that might be. As Christmas approached, the atmosphere in the Robbie home grew increasingly tense. Mandy, already stretched to her breaking point, now had to contend with Nathaniel's escalating demands and increasingly erratic behavior. The bruises from his encounter with Xavier had faded, but his anger had only intensified. Ryan, no longer able to ignore the palpable tension, began asking more pointed questions. The cracks in Mandy's carefully constructed facade were beginning to show, and she found herself struggling to maintain the illusion of normalcy. It all came to a head on Christmas Eve. The Robbies were hosting their annual holiday party, the house filled with the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses. Mandy, dressed in a stunning dress, moved among the guests with practiced ease, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. Nathaniel, sullen and nursing a whiskey in the corner, watched his stepmother with barely concealed contempt. As the night wore on and the alcohol flowed freely, his inhibitions lowered dangerously. In a moment of reckless anger, he approached Mandy as she chatted with some of Ryan's colleagues. Whispering in her ear, he demanded another payment, $5,000 this time, by the end of the week. When Mandy, her face pale but composed, tried to quietly reason with him, Nathaniel's control slipped. Mandy, her heart pounding, quickly excused herself and practically dragged Nathaniel to the study. Once there, she unleashed months of pent-up fear and frustration. In hushed but intense tones, she told Nathaniel that she was done. She wouldn't pay him anymore. If he wanted to tell Ryan, then so be it. She was tired of living under the weight of his threats. Nathaniel, caught off guard by her sudden defiance, lashed out verbally, threatening not just to expose her affair but to destroy her reputation, her marriage, her entire life. He stormed out of the study, leaving Mandy trembling but oddly relieved. She had finally stood up to him, consequences be damned. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Mandy knew she had reached a point of no return. Something had to be done, and soon. With shaking hands, she reached for her phone and sent a text to Xavier. "We need to talk, it's urgent." January 15th dawned cold and gray, a fitting backdrop for the tragedy about to unfold. Mandy had spent the week since Christmas in a state of constant anxiety, jumping at every sound, flinching every time Nathaniel entered a room. Her conversation with Xavier had been brief but intense. He had listened to her desperate pleas, his face an unreadable mask, and simply said, "I'll take care of it." Those words, which had initially brought her relief, now haunted her. What exactly did Xavier mean? As much as she wanted an end to Nathaniel's blackmail, the thought of what that end might entail filled her with dread. Nathaniel, for his part, had been unusually quiet since the Christmas Eve confrontation. He seemed to be weighing his options, unsure of how to proceed now that Mandy had called his bluff. The uncertainty only added to the suffocating tension in the house. That evening, Ryan was working late as he often did. Mandy sat in the living room, absently flipping through a magazine, her mind elsewhere. The sound of Nathaniel's car pulling into the driveway made her stiffen. She heard the front door open, his footsteps in the hall, then silence. Upstairs, Nathaniel entered his room, his mind made up. He was done playing games. Tomorrow he would tell his father everything. Let the chips fall where they may. He was so absorbed in his thoughts that he didn't hear the soft footsteps approaching his door. The knock, when it came, startled him. Expecting Mandy, he opened the door with a sneer already forming on his lips. The sight of Xavier standing there, his expression grim, wiped the sneer away instantly. What happened next was a flurry of violence that lasted mere minutes but would have repercussions for years to come. Xavier forced his way into the room, closing the door behind him. Words were exchanged. Threats, pleas, desperate bargaining. But Xavier hadn't come to negotiate. The first blow caught Nathaniel by surprise, sending him stumbling back against his desk. He fought back, his youth and desperation lending him strength, but Xavier's experience and cold determination proved too much. The struggle was brutal but brief. Downstairs, Mandy heard the muffled sounds of the fight, her heart racing. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, paralyzed by indecision and fear. A part of her knew she should intervene, call for help, do something. But another part, the part that had endured months of torment and blackmail, kept her rooted to the spot. The silence when it fell was deafening. Mandy's legs trembled as she forced herself to climb the stairs. She found Xavier standing in Nathaniel's doorway, his shirt spattered with blood, his eyes cold and empty. Behind him, she caught a glimpse of a still form on the floor and had to stifle a scream. Xavier's voice was calm, almost soothing as he guided her back downstairs. He spoke of accidents, of self-defense, of necessary evils. Mandy heard the words but couldn't process them. All she could think about was the sight of Nathaniel's lifeless body and the knowledge that in a way she was responsible for what had happened. As Xavier methodically began to clean up, to erase the evidence of what had transpired, Mandy sat in the kitchen, her mind reeling. The nightmare she had been living for months had just taken a turn she could never have imagined. And she knew with chilling certainty that her life would never be the same again. The hours that followed Nathaniel's death were a blur of frantic activity and cold calculation. Xavier, drawing on skills honed through years of criminal association, took charge of the situation with ruthless efficiency. Mandy, still in shock, found herself following Xavier's instructions mechanically. They cleaned the room meticulously, removing any trace of Xavier's presence. Nathaniel's body was wrapped in a tarp from the garage, then loaded into the trunk of Xavier's car under the cover of darkness. As dawn broke, Xavier drove away with grim purpose, leaving Mandy alone in the house with the impossible task of maintaining normalcy. When Ryan returned home later that morning, exhausted from his late night at the office, Mandy forced herself to greet him with a smile that felt like it might shatter her face. The day passed in a haze of mundane activities and internal panic. Mandy cooked, cleaned, and chatted with Ryan, all while her mind screamed with the knowledge of what had happened. When Ryan casually asked about Nathaniel's whereabouts, Mandy heard herself reply that he had mentioned going on a road trip with some friends. As days turned into weeks, the lie grew more elaborate. Mandy created a digital trail, sending emails from Nathaniel's account to Ryan, describing fictional adventures in various cities. She fielded concerned calls from Nathaniel's workplace, spinning tales of family emergencies and extended leaves of absence. Xavier had disposed of Nathaniel's body in an abandoned quarry several hours away, weighing it down to ensure it wouldn't be found. He meticulously eliminated any evidence that could connect them to Nathaniel's disappearance. For a while, it seemed their hastily constructed cover-up might hold. Life in Oakdale continued, with only a ripple of concern about Nathaniel's prolonged absence. But as winter gave way to spring and Nathaniel's silence stretched on, questions began to multiply. Ryan's initial unconcern turned to worry, then to suspicion. Mandy found herself trapped in a web of lies that grew more complex and fragile with each passing day, knowing that it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. Detective Sandra Sloan had seen her fair share of missing persons cases in her 15 years with the Oakdale Police Department, but something about Nathaniel Robbie's disappearance nagged at her from the start. The pieces didn't quite fit. The sudden departure, the sporadic communication, the lack of financial activity. As spring bloomed in Oakdale, Detective Sloan dug deeper into the Robbie family dynamics. She interviewed friends, colleagues, and neighbors, slowly piecing together a picture of a household fraught with tension. The more she learned, the more her suspicions grew. Ryan Robbie, initially reluctant to involve the police, became an increasingly vocal advocate for finding his son. His faith in Mandy's explanations had begun to waver, and he pressed for a more thorough investigation. This pressure, combined with Detective Sloan's relentless pursuit of the truth, began to expose the cracks in Mandy's carefully constructed narrative. The breakthrough came in late April, when one of Nathaniel's co-workers at the garage came forward with crucial information. He recalled overhearing a heated argument between Nathaniel and Mandy just before Christmas, with mentions of money and threats. This revelation shifted the entire focus of the investigation. Detective Sloan brought Mandy in for questioning, subjecting her to hours of intense interrogation. Mandy, worn down by months of guilt and fear, began to falter. Her story, once seamless, now showed inconsistencies. She stumbled over dates, contradicted her earlier statements, and grew visibly agitated when pressed about her relationship with Nathaniel. As Mandy's composure crumbled, Detective Sloan sensed she was on the verge of a breakthrough. She decided to take a risk, bluffing about evidence they didn't actually have. She mentioned phone records showing frequent contact with an unknown number around the time of Nathaniel's disappearance, implying they knew about Xavier's involvement. The gambit worked. Mandy, believing the police knew far more than they actually did, broke down. Through tears and gasping sobs, she confessed to the affair, the blackmail and her knowledge of Nathaniel's fate. She implicated Xavier, portraying herself as a terrified bystander to his actions. With Mandy's confession, the case broke wide open. An APB was issued for Xavier Krasinski, and search teams were dispatched to the quarry where Nathaniel's body had been hidden. As news of the confession spread through Oakdale, the community reeled from the shocking revelations. The picture-perfect family on Maple Street had harbored darker secrets than anyone could have imagined. In the days following Mandy's confession, Oakdale became the center of a media frenzy. Those vans lined Maple Street, reporters clamoring for any tidbit of information about the scandalous murder that had rocked the quiet suburb. Detective Sloan, now heading a task force dedicated to the case, worked tirelessly to bring all the perpetrators to justice thanks to Detective Sloan's skillful coordination with state and federal authorities. Xavier was apprehended at a bus station in Nevada, attempting to cross into Mexico. His arrest was the final piece of the puzzle. Under intense interrogation, Xavier eventually corroborated much of Mandy's story, though he attempted to paint himself as a man driven to desperate measures by love. He revealed the location of key evidence, including the murder weapon and some of Nathaniel's personal effects, which he had kept as a twisted sort of trophy. As the full extent of the conspiracy came to light, the impact on those involved was profound. Ryan Robbie, confronted with the brutal truth of his wife's infidelity and his son's death, withdrew from public life. Friends reported that he seemed a shell of his former self, devastated by the twin betrayals of the two people he had trusted most. The community of Oakdale, once so proud of its safe, wholesome image, was forced to confront the darkness that had festered beneath the surface. For Detective Sloan, the resolution of the case was bittersweet. While she took pride in unraveling the complex web of lies and bringing the perpetrators to justice, she couldn't shake the feeling that if she had pieced things together sooner, a young man's life might have been saved. In the end, justice was served, but it brought little comfort to those most affected. Xavier, with his history of violence and his role as the primary actor in Nathaniel's death, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Mandy, despite her attempts to paint herself as a victim of circumstance, was found guilty of conspiracy and accessory to murder. She received a 25-year sentence with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Ryan Robbie, a broken man, sold the family home and left Oakdale, unable to bear the constant reminders of his loss and betrayal. He retreated to a quiet life in another state, where he could grieve in private and attempt to rebuild some semblance of a life. The case left an indelible mark on Oakdale. The community, once known for its low crime rate and family-friendly atmosphere, now found itself grappling with a new, unwelcome notoriety. Born Sarah Callahan in 1989, she grew up in a middle-class family in Hartford, Connecticut. Her father, Michael, was a high school history teacher, and her mother, Elizabeth, worked as a nurse. Sarah was the younger of two children, with an older brother, Jason, who was 3 years her senior. From an early age, Sarah showed a keen intelligence and a drive to succeed. She excelled in school, particularly in English and debate. Her teachers often remarked on her ability to analyze complex situations and articulate her thoughts clearly. This skill would serve her well in her future career and in unraveling the mystery that would consume her life. Sarah's childhood was not without its challenges. When she was 14, her parents went through a bitter divorce. The experience left a lasting impact on Sarah, instilling in her a deep-seated fear of betrayal and a determination to build a stable, loving family of her own. She threw herself into her studies, using academic success as a way to cope with the turmoil at home. Her hard work paid off when she was accepted to Yale University on a partial scholarship. At Yale, Sarah majored in communications and minored in psychology, fascinated by the ways people interact and communicate. It was during her sophomore year that she met David Thompson at a campus mixer. David, a senior studying business administration, was immediately drawn to Sarah's quick wit and warm smile. Their relationship blossomed quickly. David's confidence and ambition complemented Sarah's intelligence and empathy. By the time Sarah graduated, they were already talking about marriage. They tied the knot 2 years later in a beautiful ceremony attended by friends and family from both sides. After college, Sarah's career in marketing took off. She had a natural talent for understanding consumer behavior and crafting compelling campaigns. By the age of 30, she had risen to the position of marketing executive at a prominent advertising firm in Hartford. Throughout her rise in the corporate world, Sarah never lost sight of her dream of having a family. She and David had always planned to have children, but as the years went by they struggled with infertility. The experience was emotionally draining, but it seemed to bring them closer together. Or so Sarah thought. The early years of Sarah and David's marriage were a whirlwind of excitement and shared dreams. They bought their first home together, a charming 4-bedroom colonial that they planned to fill with children. Weekends were spent renovating the house, exploring local farmers markets, and hosting dinner parties for their growing circle of friends. David's career as a management consultant meant frequent business trips, often lasting several days. Sarah initially found the separations difficult, but grew accustomed to them over time. She filled her days with work, yoga classes, and volunteer activities at the local animal shelter. When David was home, they made the most of their time together, taking romantic weekends away, or simply curling up on the couch with a bottle of wine and a good movie. Their friends often commented on how in love they still seemed, even after years of marriage. Sarah and David finished each other's sentences, laughed at inside jokes, and always presented a united front. They were the couple others aspired to be. But as the years went by, subtle changes began to creep into their relationship. David's business trips became more frequent and longer in duration. He was often distracted when he was home, constantly checking his phone or stepping away to take calls. Sarah attributed this to the stress of his job, and did her best to be understanding. The first real crack in their perfect facade appeared on their 10th wedding anniversary. David, who had always made a big deal out of anniversaries, forgot the date entirely. He was away on a business trip and didn't call until late in the evening. When Sarah reminded him, he was apologetic but seemed distracted. It was a small thing, but it planted a seed of doubt in Sarah's mind. Little did she know, this seed would soon grow into a tangled web of suspicion and deceit. The pivotal moment that would change Sarah's life forever came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in April. She had taken a half-day off work to prepare for a dinner party they were hosting that weekend. While searching for a specific serving platter in the guest room closet, Sarah stumbled upon a shoebox she didn't recognize. Curiosity got the better of her, and she opened it. Inside, she found a collection of items that made her blood run cold. A second cell phone, a small stack of birthday and Father's Day cards addressed to Daddy in a child's handwriting, and several photos of David with a woman and 2 young children Sarah had never seen before. Her hands shaking, Sarah examined the photos more closely. They showed David, looking happy and relaxed, with his arms around a beautiful brunette woman. 2 children, a boy who looked about 7 and a girl who appeared to be around 5, smiled up at the camera. The background of several photos suggested a house, not a hotel room or a vacation spot. Sarah's mind raced. Was this an old relationship David had never mentioned? But the children looked too young for that to be the case. The most recent Father's Day card was dated just last year. With a sinking feeling in her stomach, Sarah realized the truth she had been subconsciously avoiding. David had another family. In a daze, Sarah began to investigate further. She turned on the second phone and found it was still active. There were hundreds of text messages between David and a woman named Jennifer. Filled with endearments and discussions of everyday family life, Sarah read about school plays, doctor's appointments, and plans for family vacations. Each message was like a knife to her heart. Using the information gleaned from the messages, Sarah took to the internet, It didn't take long to find Jennifer Lawrence on social media. Her profile was mostly private, but Sarah could see enough to confirm her worst fears. There were check-ins at restaurants in Columbus, Ohio, during times when David was supposedly on business trips there. There were vague posts about loving her family, always carefully worded to not mention a husband directly. As the reality of the situation sank in, Sarah felt a range of emotions wash over her. Shock, betrayal, anger, and a deep, aching sadness. The life she thought she had, the husband she thought she knew, had all been a carefully constructed lie. She spent hours poring over David's credit card statements, finding regular charges in Columbus that he had always explained away as business expenses. She discovered a separate bank account she'd known nothing about, with regular transfers to an account in Jennifer's name. As night fell, Sarah sat in the dark living room, surrounded by the evidence of her husband's deceit. The home that had once been her sanctuary now felt tainted. Every happy memory called into question. She knew she had a decision to make. Should she confront David immediately? Consult a lawyer? Try to reach out to Jennifer? Little did Sarah know her discovery was just the beginning. The choices she would make in the coming days would set in motion a series of events that would have fatal consequences for more than one person in this tangled web of secrets and lies. As Sarah delved deeper into her investigation, a clearer picture of David's secret life emerged. Jennifer Lawrence, age 34, was a pediatric nurse at Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. She had met David 8 years ago when he was in Columbus for an extended consulting project. Their whirlwind romance had resulted in Jennifer becoming pregnant. Within months of their meeting, David, already married to Sarah for 4 years at that point, had made the fateful decision to lead a double life rather than come clean to either woman. He had told Jennifer that his job required him to split his time between Columbus and Hartford, explaining his long absences. To maintain the charade, he had even purchased a modest home in a Columbus suburb under an LLC, creating a part-time residence for his second family. The children, Jacob and Emily, believed their father's story about his demanding job. David had constructed an elaborate set of lies, telling them he was a pilot to explain his frequent absences. To Jennifer and the kids, he was a devoted family man who did his best to be present despite his challenging career. Sarah found herself obsessively comparing her life with Jennifer's. While she and David lived in a large, beautifully appointed home, Jennifer and the children had a smaller, cozier house, where Sarah and David attended glamorous corporate events. Jennifer's social media showed a life filled with children's birthday parties, little league games, and family barbecues. The stark differences between the two lives David led were astounding. With Sarah, he was the ambitious, polished executive. Family photos showed him in tailored suits at charity galas and on exotic vacations. But photos from his life with Jennifer portrayed a more relaxed, casual version of David. A man in jeans and t-shirts, building sandcastles and pushing swings. Sarah couldn't help but wonder if this other life, this other version of David, was more real than the one she knew. Had their entire marriage been a performance on his part? The David she knew would never have been content with the simple domestic life he seemed to have with Jennifer. Or had she never really known him at all? As she continued to uncover more details about David's secret family, Sarah's emotions fluctuated between rage, heartbreak, and a bizarre sense of fascination. She found herself wondering about Jennifer. Was she also a victim in this deception? Or had she known about Sarah all along? And what about the children, innocent parties who had no idea their entire family life was built on a foundation of lies? The more Sarah learned, the more she realized that confronting David wouldn't just be about her own hurt and betrayal. Her actions would have far-reaching consequences, potentially destroying the lives of 2 young children who had done nothing wrong. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on her, making the decision of what to do next feel impossibly heavy. After days of internal turmoil, Sarah finally decided she couldn't continue living a lie. She needed answers, and she needed them from David. She chose a Friday evening when he was due to return from a business trip to confront him. Sarah spent the day in a state of high anxiety, rehearsing what she would say, imagining his responses and trying to prepare herself for every possibility. When David walked through the door at 7 p.m., his welcoming smile faltered as he saw Sarah sitting rigidly on the living room couch, the shoebox and piles of evidence laid out on the coffee table before her. The color drained from his face as he realized his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. "Sarah, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to remain calm. "I know about Jennifer and the kids. I know everything." For a moment, David stood frozen in the doorway, his face a mask of shock and fear. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, he moved into damage control mode. He approached Sarah, his hands held out in a placating gesture. "Honey, I can explain. It's not what you think." But Sarah was beyond placation. Months of suspicion followed by days of agonizing certainty had left her raw and angry. She erupted, her voice rising as she hurled questions and accusations at her husband. How long had this been going on? How could he betray her like this? Did he ever really love her? Or was their entire marriage a lie? David's responses came in a jumble of excuses and apologies. He hadn't meant for it to happen. He'd felt trapped. He loved both his families in different ways. He'd always intended to find a way to end things with Jennifer. But then the children came along. He was sorry, so sorry. As the argument escalated, Sarah noticed a change come over David. His initial shock and remorse gave way to a cold, calculating look. When Sarah mentioned going to Jennifer with the truth, David's demeanor changed entirely. His voice took on a threatening edge as he told Sarah to think very carefully about her next move. Suddenly, Sarah realized she was seeing a side of David she'd never known existed. This wasn't the man she'd married, the man she thought she knew better than anyone in the world. This was a stranger, capable of living a lie for years, of deceiving everyone around him. For the first time, she felt a flicker of fear. The confrontation ended abruptly when David, his face contorted with a mixture of anger and panic, stormed out of the house. Sarah heard his car start up and peel out of the driveway. She was left alone in the echoing silence of their home. Surrounded by the debris of their shattered life in the immediate aftermath of the confrontation, Sarah felt numb. She moved through the house in a daze alternating between bouts of uncontrollable tears and periods of eerie calm. She called in sick to work and spent days in a fog, barely eating or sleeping, replaying the confrontation over and over in her mind. David didn't return home at first. Sarah assumed he had gone to Jennifer, to warn her or perhaps to finally choose his other family over his life with Sarah. But as days passed with no word from David, no charges on their joint credit cards, no activity on his main cell phone, a new worry began to gnaw at her. Where was David? What was he planning? The man she had confronted was not the David she knew, and she had no idea what he might be capable of. As the silence stretched on, Sarah's worry turned to fear. She hadn't told anyone about what she'd discovered, about the confrontation. Now, with David missing and her world in shambles, she realized she was alone with a secret that felt too big, too dangerous to keep to herself. Little did Sarah know, her decision to finally share what she knew would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to consequences far more dire than she could have ever imagined. 5 days after the confrontation, with still no word from David, Sarah finally broke her silence. She reached out to David's younger sister, Emma, the family member she felt closest to. Over coffee at a quiet cafe, Sarah poured out the whole story. Emma listened with growing horror, her face pale and drawn as Sarah revealed the extent of David's deception. Emma's shock quickly turned to action. Convinced that David's disappearance was cause for serious concern, she insisted they go to the police. Despite Sarah's reluctance, fearing the public exposure of their private tragedy, she agreed. The police took the report seriously. Detective Michael Lawson, a veteran of the force with a reputation for solving complex cases, was assigned to the investigation. He listened intently as Sarah recounted the events leading up to David's disappearance. The revelation of the secret family raised immediate red flags for the experienced detective. Jennifer Lawrence, shell-shocked by the revelations, initially refused to speak to anyone, but as the investigation progressed, she had no choice but to cooperate with the police. Her statement painted a picture of a loving partner and father, a man who had never given her reason to suspect he had another life. As Detective Lawson dug deeper, more inconsistencies in David's life came to light. Financial records showed large sums of money being moved around in ways that didn't match his known income. Colleagues reported that some of David's claimed business trips didn't align with company records. The image of David Thompson as a successful, honest businessman began to crumble under the weight of mounting evidence of fraud and deception. 2 weeks into the investigation, a potential breakthrough came when David's car was found abandoned at a parking garage near Bradley International Airport. Security footage showed David entering the garage, but no cameras had captured him leaving. This discovery only deepened the mystery. Had David fled the country? Was he hiding somewhere, waiting for the scandal to blow over? Or had something more sinister occurred as the investigation intensified? The strain began to show on both Sarah and Jennifer. Sarah, once a fixture in social scene, became a virtual recluse, leaving her house only when absolutely necessary. Jennifer, struggling to maintain normalcy for her children, took a leave of absence from work as the stress of the situation became overwhelming. The chain of events set in motion by Sarah's discovery had already irrevocably altered many lives. But as the search for David continued, no one could have predicted the dark turn things were about to take. As weeks turned into months, Detective Lawson and his team continued to dig into every aspect of David Thompson's life. What they uncovered painted a picture of a man who had been living on the edge of discovery for years, juggling not just 2 families, but a complex web of financial fraud. Interviews with David's colleagues revealed a pattern of discrepancies in his work history. Simon Reeves, a fellow consultant, recalled instances where David had claimed to be at client meetings that Reeves knew had never taken place. He had always admired David's ability to bring in new business, but now he wondered if those clients had ever really existed. David's financial records told an even more damning story. Forensic accountants discovered an elaborate Ponzi scheme that David had been running for years. He had been using his position to create fake consulting contracts, then using money from new investors to pay off older ones while skimming large sums for himself. This explained how he had been able to maintain 2 households and fund his lavish lifestyle. As the truth about David's fraudulent activities came to light, many of his former friends and associates found themselves under scrutiny. Sarah, still reeling from the destruction of her marriage, was now faced with the possibility that everything in her life with David had been built on criminal activity. She spent hours talking with lawyers trying to understand the extent of her legal exposure. Though she had been unaware of David's illegal activities, she feared that her comfortable lifestyle might have been funded by stolen money. Meanwhile, in Columbus, Jennifer was grappling with her own version of this nightmare. The life she had built with David, the father of her children, was crumbling around her. She was questioned repeatedly by police, her every interaction with David over the years scrutinized for clues. The hardest part was explaining to Jacob and Emily why their father wasn't coming home, why people were saying bad things about him on TV. As the investigation progressed, a clearer timeline of David's last known movements began to emerge. Security footage from the airport parking garage where his car was found showed David entering on the night of his disappearance, carrying a large duffel bag. However, no footage showed him leaving the garage or entering the airport terminal. This led to a thorough search of the parking garage, including areas not covered by cameras. It was during this search that investigators made a grim discovery. Hidden in a seldom-used stairwell, they found David's duffel bag. Inside were his wallet, phone, and a handwritten note. The contents of the note sent shockwaves through everyone involved in the case. In it, David confessed to his fraudulent activities and expressed remorse for the pain he had caused both his families. He wrote of feeling trapped, of the constant fear of discovery that had dominated his life for years. The note ended with a chilling statement. "By the time you read this, I'll be gone. It's better this way. I'm sorry for everything." The discovery of the note changed the direction of the investigation. Was this a suicide note? Had David taken his own life? So where was his body? A final deception in a life full of lies, meant to throw investigators off his trail while he escaped to start yet another new life somewhere else. As the search for David Thompson entered a new phase, the ripple effects of his actions continued to spread. Lives had been upended, fortunes lost, and reputations ruined. But the full extent of the damage was yet to be revealed, and the body count was about to rise. 3 months after David's disappearance, the investigation took a dark and unexpected turn. Simon Reeves, David's colleague who had spoken to the police about discrepancies in David's work claim, was found dead in his home. At first glance, it appeared to be a tragic accident. Reeves had apparently fallen down the stairs after a night of heavy drinking. However, certain details didn't add up. Detective Lawson, now leading a task force dedicated to the Thompson case and its offshoots, approached the scene with suspicion. The position of Reeves' body seemed off for an accidental fall. Moreover, Reeves was known to be a social drinker but not prone to excess. A thorough forensic examination revealed traces of a powerful sedative in Reeves' system, one not prescribed to him. As the investigation into Reeves' death progressed, a chilling theory began to take shape. Had someone silenced Reeves to prevent him from revealing more about David's fraudulent activities? The timing was certainly suspicious. Reeves had been scheduled to give a more detailed statement to the police the very next day. The news of Reeves' death sent shockwaves. Those who had known David, who had been interviewed by police or were scheduled to be, began to look over their shoulders. The story that had started as a salacious tale of a double life had now turned deadly. Sarah, already struggling with anxiety and depression in the wake of David's disappearance, became nearly paralyzed with fear. She had never known Reeves well, but the idea that someone connected to David's case had died violently terrified her. She installed a security system in her home and rarely ventured out. In Columbus, Jennifer faced her own set of fears. She had her children to think of, and the idea that they might be in danger because of their connection to David was almost unbearable. She considered moving, starting fresh somewhere new, but the ongoing investigation made that impossible. As the police dug deeper into Reeves' death, they discovered that he had been compiling his own file on David's activities. His home office had been thoroughly searched before the police arrived, but the searchers had overlooked a hidden safe. Inside, detectives found documents suggesting that David's fraud went even deeper than they had initially suspected, potentially involving offshore accounts and connections to organized crime. The death of Simon Reeves marked a turning point in the case. What had begun as a story of infidelity and financial fraud had now become a potential murder investigation. And as tensions rose and fear spread, it would not be the last life claimed by the fallout from David Thompson's web of lies. In the weeks following Simon Reeves' death, a palpable sense of fear gripped everyone connected to the David Thompson case. The police increased patrols where Jennifer and the children lived, but it did little to calm nerves. Threats began to surface. Sarah received anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, heavy breathing on the other end of the line. Jennifer found her car vandalized, the word liar scratched into the paint. David's former boss at the consulting firm received a package containing a dead rat. The investigation into Reeves' death led to more questions than answers. Surveillance footage from the neighborhood showed a nondescript van parked near Reeves' house on the night of his death, but the license plate was obscured. Interviews with Reeves' neighbors turned up reports of a stranger asking questions about Reeves in the days leading up to his death, but descriptions of the man were vague and contradictory. As the pressure mounted, cracks began to show in the facade of those closest to the case. Emma, David's sister, had a public meltdown in a local supermarket, screaming at a cashier who she thought was staring at her. Jennifer's oldest child, Jacob, was suspended from school for getting into a fight with a classmate who had taunted him about his missing father. Detective Lawson and his team worked around the clock chasing down every lead, no matter how small. They were convinced that the key to unraveling the entire mystery lay in the missing pieces of David's financial records, but every time they thought they were close to a breakthrough, they hit another dead end. The case had become a powder keg, tensions rising with each passing day. All it would take was one spark to set off an explosion. That spark was about to come, in the form of another shocking death. The second death came 6 weeks after Simon Reeves' murder, and this time it struck much closer to home. Emma Thompson, David's younger sister and the person who had first encouraged Sarah to go to the police, was found dead in her apartment. Unlike Reeves' death, there was no attempt to disguise this as an accident. Emma had been strangled, her apartment ransacked, The brutality of the crime scene shocked even seasoned detectives. It was clear that the killer had been searching for something, but whether they had found it remained a mystery. The news hit Sarah like a physical blow. Emma had been her closest confidant throughout this ordeal. The one person who seemed to understand the complex emotions Sarah was grappling with. Now she was gone, another victim of the chaos David had unleashed. Jennifer, upon hearing the news, made the difficult decision to move her children to her parents' home in rural Ohio. The danger felt too close, too real, and her maternal instinct screamed at her to protect her children at all costs. As the investigation into Emma's murder progressed, a disturbing theory began to take shape. Emma had been compiling her own dossier on David's activities, driven by a mix of disbelief, anger, and a desire to understand how her brother could have lived such an elaborate lie. Had she uncovered something that made her a target? The police found Emma's laptop missing from her apartment. Her cloud storage had been wiped clean just hours before her estimated time of death. Whatever Emma had discovered, someone had gone to great lengths to ensure it didn't get out. The double blow of Reeves and Emma's deaths sent shockwaves through law enforcement. The FBI was officially brought in. The case now clearly extending beyond the jurisdiction of local police agent Carla Mendez, a veteran of high-profile white-collar crime investigations, was assigned to work with Detective Lawson. As Mendez dug into the case, she began to see patterns that suggested this was bigger than just David Thompson, the financial fraud, the murders, the professional hits disguised as accidents. It all pointed to organized crime involvement. Had David gotten in over his head with dangerous people, or was he more deeply involved in criminal activities than anyone had suspected? With 2 murders now linked to the case, the pressure to find David, dead or alive, intensified. But the man who had managed to lead a double life for years was proving just as elusive in his disappearance. As the investigation entered a new phase, those left in David's wake could only wait in fear, wondering who might be the next target. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source. A hiker in a state park some 50 miles from Millbrook stumbled upon an abandoned cabin. Inside, he found evidence of recent occupation and a wall covered in newspaper clippings. The hiker, spooked by the scene, called the police. When Detective Lawson and Agent Mendez arrived at the cabin, they knew immediately they had found something significant. Hidden under a loose floorboard, they discovered a laptop that they would later confirm belonged to Emma Thompson. It was the first real lead they'd had in weeks. As forensic experts began to comb through the cabin and its surroundings, Sarah received a phone call that chilled her to the bone. It was David. His voice was ragged, barely recognizable. He told her he needed to see her, to explain everything. Against her better judgment, driven by a desperate need for answers, Sarah agreed to meet him. The rendezvous point was an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. Sarah, her heart pounding, entered the dilapidated building. She had tipped off Detective Lawson about the meeting, and she knew the police were surrounding the area, but she still felt terrifyingly vulnerable. David emerged from the shadows, a ghost of the man she had married. He was gaunt, his eyes sunken, his once immaculate appearance now ragged and unkempt. For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of all that had happened hanging heavily between them. Finally, David began to talk. The words poured out of him in a torrent. He spoke of getting involved with a criminal organization years ago, using his consulting job as a cover for money laundering. At first, it had just been about the thrill, the extra money. But soon he was in too deep to get out. His voice broke as he talked about Jennifer and the kids, about how he had genuinely fallen in love with his second family. He had tried to keep them separate from his criminal activities, to give them the normal life he felt he could never fully provide for Sarah. As David talked, Sarah felt a mix of emotions washing over her. Anger, pity, disgust, and a lingering echo of the love she had once felt for this man. But mostly, she felt a deep, aching sadness for all the lives destroyed by David's choices. Suddenly, David's demeanor changed. He mentioned Emma and Reeves, his eyes taking on a wild, paranoid look. He was convinced they were coming for him, that nowhere was safe. Sarah, alarmed by his erratic behavior, tried to calm him down, to convince him to turn himself in. At that moment, The sound of police sirens filled the air. David panicked, pulled out a gun. Sarah hadn't even realized he was armed. She raised her hands, trying to talk him down, but David was beyond reason. He was waving the gun erratically, shouting about how he couldn't go to prison. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds, but would play out in slow motion in Sarah's nightmares for years to come. The police burst in, ordering David to drop his weapon. David, his face contorted in anguish, turned the gun on himself. A shot rang out. In the chaos that followed, as police swarmed the scene and paramedics rushed in, Sarah stood frozen, watching as the final act of David Thompson's tragic story played out before her eyes. In the days and weeks following the confrontation at the abandoned factory, the full extent of David Thompson's crimes came to light. The laptop found in the cabin provided a wealth of information, unraveling a complex web of financial fraud, money laundering, and connections to organized crime that spanned more than a decade. David had survived his suicide attempt but was left in a coma. He would never stand trial for his crimes, never have to face the people whose lives he had destroyed. For many, this felt like a final injustice. The criminal organization David had been involved with was exposed, leading to a series of arrests. It turned out that Reeves and Emma had been killed not by David, but by members of this organization, fearing exposure. Sarah, her life forever altered, decided to leave Millbrook. Jennifer and her children remained in Ohio, struggling to rebuild their lives away from the spotlight. In the picturesque coastal town of Millhaven, where the salty breeze carries whispers of secrets and lies, a tragedy was brewing beneath the surface of everyday life. The quaint streets, lined with colorful boutiques and cozy cafes, masked a web of deceit that would soon unravel, leaving the community shaken to its core. At the heart of this tale are three individuals whose lives became inextricably intertwined. Lachlan Thorne, a man desperate for financial stability and respect. Zara Callahan, a talented chef with dreams bigger than the small town could contain, and Enzo Rossi, the charismatic owner of a popular Italian restaurant. To the outside world, Lachlan and Zara appeared to be the perfect couple, young and in love with a bright future ahead. Their engagement was the talk of the town, a beacon of hope in a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, but beneath the surface cracks were forming in their relationship. Cracks that would soon split wide open. Enzo, with his easy charm and successful business, seemed to have it all. His restaurant was a local institution, and his marriage to Vivian, a respected member of the town council, was envied by many. Yet behind closed doors, Enzo harbored his own dissatisfactions and desires. As summer faded into autumn, the stage was set for a series of events that would lead to betrayal, blackmail, and ultimately, bloodshed. The story of how these three lives collided is a cautionary tale of passion, greed, and the devastating consequences of keeping secrets in a town where the truth always finds its way to the surface. Lachlan Thorne's story began far from the shores of Millhaven, in a struggling mining town where dreams went to die. The youngest of 4 children, Lachlan grew up watching his father descend into the depths of the earth day after day, only to return home beaten down by the relentless toil. His mother, a part-time seamstress, struggled to keep the family afloat, her fingers constantly pricked by needles as she worked late into the night. From an early age, Lachlan vowed he would escape the cycle of poverty that had trapped his parents. He threw himself into his studies, earning a scholarship to a prestigious university in the city. But the transition from his humble beginnings to the world of academia proved more challenging than he anticipated. Surrounded by wealthy peers who seemed to navigate college life with ease, Lachlan felt like an outsider, constantly battling the feeling that he didn't belong. Despite his best efforts, Lachlan's insecurities began to manifest in self-destructive behaviors. He developed a gambling habit, convinced that one big win could solve all his problems. Instead, it left him deeper in debt, forcing him to take on multiple part-time jobs just to stay afloat. By the time he graduated, the promise of a bright future had dimmed considerably. Lachlan drifted from job to job, never quite finding his footing in the corporate world. His resume became a patchwork of short-term positions and gaps, each failure chipping away at his self-esteem. As his 30th birthday approached, he found himself back in a small town, not unlike the one he had tried so hard to escape. It was in Millhaven that Lachlan's luck seemed to change. He landed a job as a marketing manager for a local brewery, a position that finally allowed him to showcase his skills. More importantly, it was here that he met Zara Callahan. Their whirlwind romance offered Lachlan a glimpse of the life he had always dreamed of: successful, respected, and loved. When he proposed to Zara after just 6 months of dating, Lachlan truly believed he had finally overcome his past. But old habits die hard, and the pressure to provide Zara with the life he thought she deserved began to weigh heavily on him. As wedding plans progressed, Lachlan found himself once again drawn to the false promise of easy money, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to tragedy. Zara Callahan's journey to Millhaven was paved with both passion and pain. Born to a free-spirited mother and an absent father, Zara spent her childhood bouncing between relatives' homes and short-term apartments. Her mother, Fiona, was a talented artist, but struggled with substance abuse, leaving young Zara to fend for herself more often than not. It was during one of their stays with Zara's maternal grandmother that she discovered her love for cooking. In her grandmother's warm, fragrant kitchen, Zara found solace and stability. She would spend hours watching the elderly woman transform simple ingredients into mouth-watering dishes, soaking up every technique and family recipe like a sponge. As Zara entered her teenage years, her mother's addiction worsened. At 15, Zara made the difficult decision to leave her mother's care, moving in permanently with her grandmother. It was a choice that haunted her, but one that allowed her to focus on her dreams. She threw herself into her culinary pursuits, working part-time at local restaurants while excelling in her high school's home economics classes. Zara's talent didn't go unnoticed. She earned a scholarship to a prestigious culinary school where she honed her skills and developed her own unique style. Her instructors praised her innovative approach to traditional dishes, and her fellow students admired her dedication and creativity. However, just as Zara was about to graduate, tragedy struck. Her grandmother passed away suddenly, leaving Zara feeling unmoored once again. Grief-stricken and unsure of her next move, she deferred her dreams of working in a big city restaurant and returned to her grandmother's house in Millhaven. It was meant to be temporary, just long enough to settle her grandmother's affairs. But when she heard that the renowned restaurant was hiring, Zara saw an opportunity to gain experience while figuring out her next steps. She impressed Enzo Rossi with her skills and passion, and what was supposed to be a short-term position turned into years. Zara threw herself into her work, quickly rising through the ranks to become the restaurant's sous chef. She found a sense of family among her co-workers and began to put down roots in Millhaven. When she met Lachlan, it seemed like the final piece of her life was falling into place. Little did she know that the stability she had worked so hard to achieve was about to be shattered by a web of desire, deceit, and desperation. The restaurant stood as a testament to Enzo Rossi's unwavering ambition and culinary expertise. The restaurant, with its warm terracotta walls and the intoxicating aroma of authentic Italian cuisine, had been Enzo's dream since he first set foot in Millhaven 20 years ago. A first-generation immigrant, Enzo had arrived with little more than a suitcase full of his nana's recipes and an unshakable determination to succeed. The early years were a struggle, with Enzo working grueling hours to establish his restaurant's reputation. His charm and culinary skills gradually won over the initially skeptical locals, and the restaurant became the go-to spot for everything from first dates to golden wedding anniversaries. Enzo took pride in knowing his regular customers by name, always ready with a warm smile and a perfectly paired wine recommendation. It was during this period of growing success that Enzo met Vivian, a local girl from a well-respected family. Their whirlwind romance culminated in a lavish wedding that was the talk of Millhaven for months. Vivian, with her sharp business acumen, helped streamline the restaurant's operations, allowing Enzo to focus on what he loved most, creating exquisite dishes in the kitchen. On the surface, Enzo appeared to have it all: a thriving business, a beautiful wife, and the respect of the community. He became a pillar of Millhaven society, sponsoring local events and mentoring aspiring chefs at the high school. His annual charity dinners were legendary, raising substantial funds for various community projects. However, as the years passed, cracks began to appear in Enzo's seemingly perfect life. The long hours at the restaurant took their toll on his marriage. Vivian, now deeply involved in local politics, had less and less time for the romantic gestures that had once characterized their relationship. Their conversations, once filled with dreams and laughter, became focused on business strategies and social obligations. Enzo found himself increasingly restless, yearning for the passion that seemed to have faded from his life. He threw himself into his work, constantly innovating and expanding the restaurant's menu. But even his beloved kitchen began to feel like a gilded cage, trapping him in a life that no longer brought him joy. As he approached his 50th birthday, Enzo felt a growing sense of dissatisfaction. He began to question the choices that had led him to this point, wondering if he had sacrificed too much of himself in pursuit of success. It was in this state of emotional vulnerability that Enzo first began to see Zara as more than just his talented sous chef, setting the stage for a relationship that would have far-reaching and ultimately tragic consequences. The spark between Enzo and Zara ignited on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening in late autumn. The restaurant was uncharacteristically quiet, with only a handful of patrons braving the stormy weather. As closing time approached, Enzo found himself alone in the kitchen with Zara, both of them working in comfortable silence to prepare for the next day. It was Zara who broke the quiet, suggesting a new twist on one of the restaurant's classic dishes. Enzo, intrigued, invited her to demonstrate. As they worked side by side, chopping herbs and sautéing vegetables, Enzo was struck by Zara's passion and creativity. Her eyes lit up as she explained her ideas, and Enzo found himself drawn in not just by her culinary skills, but by her vibrant energy. As they tasted the finished dish together, their eyes met over the steaming plate. In that moment, something shifted between them. Enzo, caught off guard by the intensity of his feelings, made a casual comment about the late hour and suggested they call it a night. But as Zara gathered her things to leave, a clap of thunder startled her, causing her to drop her bag. Enzo rushed to help, and as they both reached for the scattered contents, their hands touched. The physical contact, brief as it was, sent a jolt through both of them. Before either could fully process what was happening, they found themselves in each other's arms, sharing a passionate kiss that left them both breathless and confused. In the days that followed, Enzo and Zara tried to maintain a professional distance, but the tension between them was palpable. Stolen glances across the kitchen, lingering touches as they passed each other in the narrow hallways. It was only a matter of time before they gave in to their desires. Their first real encounter happened after hours in Enzo's office. What started as a discussion about the next season's menu quickly evolved into a heated expression of their pent-up passion. As they lay tangled together on the small leather sofa, both Enzo and Zara knew they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. For Zara, the affair was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The exhilaration of being with Enzo was constantly at war with her guilt over betraying Lachlan. She told herself it was just a physical thing, that her feelings for her fiancé remained unchanged. But as the weeks passed, she found herself increasingly drawn to Enzo, not just physically but emotionally as well. Enzo, for his part, felt rejuvenated by the relationship. With Zara, he rediscovered the passion he had been missing both in and out of the kitchen. He convinced himself that he deserved this happiness, that the years of dedication to his wife and his business entitled him to this secret indulgence. As summer turned to fall, their affair deepened, becoming more than just stolen moments of physical intimacy. Neither Enzo nor Zara were prepared for the storm that was brewing, threatening to destroy everything they had built. Lachlan Thorne prided himself on his ability to read people, a skill honed through years of navigating the corporate world. So when Zara's behavior began to change subtly, he noticed it started with small things. She was working later hours, seemed distracted during their time together, and was constantly checking her phone. At first, Lachlan attributed it to the stress of wedding planning and her increased responsibilities at the restaurant. But as the weeks passed, a nagging suspicion began to take root in his mind. One evening, as they sat on opposite ends of the couch, ostensibly watching a movie together, Lachlan observed Zara smiling at her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she typed out a message. When he casually asked who she was texting, Zara's response was too quick, too rehearsed. "A coworker?" she said, discussing a new recipe. But the flush on her cheeks and the way she quickly locked her phone told a different story. Determined to uncover the truth, Lachlan began to pay closer attention to Zara's schedule and movements. He noted the nights she came home particularly late, the weekends she claimed to be doing inventory at the restaurant. He even drove by the restaurant a few times, noting with growing unease that Zara's car was often the only one in the parking lot besides Enzo's distinctive vintage Alfa Romeo. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place on a crisp, autumn evening. Lachlan, unable to shake his suspicions, decided to surprise Zara at work. As he approached the restaurant, he saw two figures silhouetted in the dim light of the kitchen. Through the window, he watched in stunned silence as Enzo pulled Zara close, their lips meeting in a passionate kiss. The sight hit Lachlan like a physical blow. He stumbled back to his car, his mind reeling. All the little inconsistencies, the late nights, the distracted behavior. It all made sense now. The woman he loved, the woman he had planned to spend his life with, was having an affair with her boss. As he sat in his car watching the restaurant, a toxic mixture of emotions coursed through him. Hurt, betrayal, anger, but also surprisingly a cold calculation. Lachlan had always prided himself on his ability to turn situations to his advantage. And as the initial shock wore off, his mind began to work. He thought about the upcoming wedding, the deposits they had already paid. He thought about the shame of calling it off, of admitting to friends and family that he had been deceived. And then he thought about the restaurant, about Enzo's wealth and success. A plan began to form in Lachlan's mind. If Zara thought she could betray him and get away with it, she was sorely mistaken. He would make her pay quite literally, and in doing so, he would secure the financial stability he had always craved. As he started his car and drove away from the restaurant, Lachlan's hurt and betrayal hardened into resolve. Zara's infidelity would be her downfall and his ticket to the life he deserved. Lachlan bided his time, carefully planning his next move. He needed irrefutable evidence before confronting Zara. Over the next week, he meticulously documented her comings and goings, even going so far as to plant a small voice-activated recorder in her car. It was an invasion of privacy that made him feel dirty, but he justified it as necessary, given the circumstances. When he finally had what he needed, a recording of Zara and Enzo in an intimate conversation that left no doubt about their relationship, Lachlan set his plan in motion. He chose a quiet Sunday morning when Zara was relaxed and off guard to spring his trap. "Lachlan, I know about you and Enzo," he said without preamble as Zara sipped her coffee. The mug slipped from her fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor. Her face, drained of color, told him everything he needed to know. What followed was a conversation filled with tears, recriminations, and desperate pleas. Zara begged for forgiveness, swearing that the affair meant nothing, that Lachlan was the one she truly loved. But Lachlan had steeled himself against her explanations. He laid out his terms coldly. If she wanted to keep their engagement intact and avoid the scandal of her affair being exposed, she would have to do exactly as he said. His demands were simple yet devastating. Zara would use her position at the restaurant to embezzle money, skimming from the daily takings and manipulating the books to cover her tracks. The amount would start small but increase over time. Lachlan framed it as restitution, compensation for the hurt and humiliation she had caused him. Zara, caught between her guilt and her fear of losing everything, reluctantly agreed. She rationalized that it would be temporary, that she could find a way out of this situation without anyone getting hurt. But deep down, she knew she had set foot on a dangerous path. The scheme began slowly. Zara, leveraging her trusted position and her access to the restaurant's financial systems, started by pocketing small amounts from the cash register, no more than $50 at a time. She meticulously altered the daily reports, adjusting inventory numbers and falsifying receipts to cover her tracks. Each time she handed the stolen money to Lachlan, she felt a piece of her soul crumble away. Lachlan, for his part, treated the whole affair with a chilling detachment. He set up a separate bank account to deposit the stolen funds, careful to keep the transactions below amounts that might trigger suspicion. To the outside world, he played the role of the doting fiancé, but in private, he was cold and demanding, constantly pressing Zara for more. As weeks turned into months, the amounts grew larger. Lachlan's appetite for money seemed insatiable, and Zara found herself taking greater risks to meet his demands. She began to manipulate the payroll, creating ghost employees and diverting their salaries. She falsified supplier invoices, pocketing the difference between the actual and inflated costs. The stress of maintaining the deception took its toll on Zara. She lost weight, dark circles forming under her eyes from sleepless nights spent agonizing over her actions. Her once bubbly personality became subdued, her passion for cooking diminishing, as the kitchen she once loved became a constant reminder of her betrayal. Lachlan, however, thrived. The influx of cash allowed him to pay off his gambling debts and even start making risky investments in the stock market. He began to dress better, drive a newer car, and talk about purchasing a house, all under the guise of planning for their future together. As the wedding date approached, Zara found herself trapped in a nightmare of her own making. The thought of marrying Lachlan filled her with dread, but she saw no way out. She had committed crimes, betrayed not only her fiancé but also Enzo and the restaurant that had given her a chance. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, making each day a struggle to maintain the facade of normality. Little did Zara know that her carefully constructed house of cards was about to come tumbling down. Enzo, sharp-eyed and attentive to his business, had begun to notice discrepancies in the books. The confrontation that was brewing would set in motion a chain of events that would change all their lives forever. Enzo Rossi had built his restaurant empire on attention to detail, and it was this meticulous nature that first alerted him to the problem. Small inconsistencies in the daily reports, slight discrepancies in the inventory. Individually, they were easy to overlook, but collectively, they painted a troubling picture. At first, Enzo attributed the errors to simple mistakes or software glitches. He spent long nights poring over spreadsheets, trying to reconcile the numbers. But as the discrepancies continued to mount, a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. Someone was stealing from him, and given the nature of the manipulations, it had to be someone with intimate knowledge of the restaurant's operations. His suspicions inevitably turned to Zara. She had access to all the systems, and the changes had begun around the time their affair started. The thought that she might be betraying him professionally as well as personally was almost too much to bear. Enzo chose a quiet afternoon to confront Zara, calling her into his office under the pretense of discussing a new menu. As soon as the door closed behind her, the facade dropped. He laid out the evidence he had gathered. Watching her face carefully for any reaction, Zara's world seemed to crumble around her. Caught between her loyalty to Enzo and her fear of Lachlan, she broke down, confessing everything through a flood of tears. She told Enzo about Lachlan's discovery of their affair, the blackmail, and the escalating demands for money. Enzo listened in stunned silence, a maelstrom of emotions raging within him. Anger at the betrayal warred with concern for Zara and fear for his own reputation. The revelation of the theft was bad enough, but if word of their affair got out, it would destroy not only his marriage, but also the carefully cultivated image he had built in the community. In the end, self-preservation won out. Enzo made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. He wouldn't go to the police. The risk of exposure was too great. Instead, he would handle this internally. He demanded that Zara end things with Lachlan immediately and return every cent that had been stolen. In return, he would keep quiet about her crimes. What Enzo didn't realize was that his decision to keep the police out of it would set in motion a dangerous chain of events. Lachlan, already teetering on the edge of desperation, would not take kindly to having his source of money cut off. And Zara, caught between two men in her own guilt, was a ticking time bomb of emotions. As Zara left Enzo's office, both of them believed they had found a solution. In reality, they had merely set the stage for a confrontation that would end in tragedy. In the days following her confrontation with Enzo, Zara felt as if she were walking on a tightrope, constantly on the verge of losing her balance. She knew she had to end things with Lachlan, but the thought filled her with dread. Lachlan had already shown how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted, and she feared his reaction to being cut off. Lachlan, oblivious to the shift in dynamics, continued to press Zara for more money. His demands had become increasingly erratic, fueled by early success in his stock market gambles. He talked of quitting his job, of investing full-time, painting pictures of a lavish future that made Zara's stomach churn with anxiety. When Zara finally gathered the courage to confront Lachlan, the conversation quickly spiraled out of control. She told him about Enzo's discovery, her voice shaking as she explained that there would be no more money. Lachlan's reaction was explosive. He raged at her, accusing her of choosing Enzo over him, threatening to expose their affair and her theft to the entire town. In a moment of desperation, Zara blurted out that Enzo already knew about the affair, that he had chosen to keep it quiet to protect his own reputation. It was the wrong thing to say. Lachlan's anger transformed into a cold, calculating fury. If Enzo was willing to cover up the theft to hide the affair, Lachlan reasoned, then perhaps there was still a way to profit from the situation. Over the next few days, Lachlan began to formulate a new plan. He started showing up at the restaurant during busy hours, making vague comments within earshot of staff and customers. He sent anonymous letters to Vivian, hinting at her husband's infidelity without providing concrete details. Each move was designed to ratchet up the pressure on Enzo, to push him towards a breaking point. Zara watched this unfolding disaster with a sense of helpless dread. She tried to warn Enzo, but he was already retreating into himself, becoming paranoid and short-tempered. The once bustling kitchen of the restaurant became a pressure cooker of tension, with staff picking up on the strained atmosphere between Enzo and Zara. As Lachlan's actions became bolder, Enzo's grip on the situation began to slip. He started drinking heavily, making careless mistakes in the kitchen. Vivian, picking up on the whispers and her husband's strange behavior, became increasingly suspicious and confrontational. The carefully constructed lives of all involved were unraveling at an alarming rate. It was clear that something had to give, but no one could have predicted the violent culmination that was about to unfold in the very place where it all began. The kitchen of the restaurant. The night that changed everything started like any other at the restaurant. The dining room hummed with the chatter of patrons, the clink of cutlery against fine china, and the soft strains of Italian music. But in the kitchen, the atmosphere was charged with an almost palpable tension. Enzo had been drinking since the afternoon, his movements becoming increasingly erratic as he barked orders at his staff. Zara worked silently at her station, her eyes constantly darting to the door, dreading Lachlan's now nightly appearance to taunt them. It was just past 9 when Lachlan pushed through the kitchen doors, his face flushed with a dangerous combination of alcohol and bravado. "Enzo, you and I need to have a chat," he announced loudly, causing several of the kitchen staff to pause in their work. Enzo, his patience already worn thin, gestured sharply for Lachlan to follow him into the small office adjacent to the kitchen. Zara, her heart pounding, trailed after them, determined to prevent the confrontation she had been fearing. The next few minutes were a blur of shouting and accusations. Lachlan, emboldened by drink, laid out his demands, a substantial sum of money in exchange for his silence. Enzo, equally inebriated, refused, his face purpling with rage as he yelled at Lachlan to get out of his restaurant. Sarah tried to intervene, pleading with both men to calm down, to think rationally. But her words fell on deaf ears. The situation escalated rapidly, with Lachlan grabbing a knife from a nearby prep table, and Enzo lunging for the gun he kept hidden in his desk drawer for emergencies. What happened next would be debated in the courts for months to come. In the chaos of the moment, with Zara screaming for them to stop, a shot rang out. The bullet, whether by intent or accident, struck Lachlan in the chest. He staggered backward, a look of shock on his face before crumpling to the floor. The kitchen erupted into pandemonium. Staff members rushed in, drawn by the sound of the gunshot. Someone called for an ambulance, while others tried to stem the flow of blood from Lachlan's wound. Enzo stood frozen, the gun still in his hand, as the full impact of what had just occurred washed over him. Zara, in a state of shock, found herself mechanically reciting the events to the police officers who arrived on the scene. She watched as Lachlan was stretchered out, his fate uncertain, and as Enzo was led away in handcuffs, still protesting that it had been self-defense. As the adrenaline of the moment faded, the weight of her role in the tragedy began to sink in. Her affair with Enzo, her agreement to Lachlan's blackmail scheme, her failure to come clean earlier, all of it had led to this moment. The life she had carefully built in Millhaven lay in ruins around her, and she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The shot fired in the kitchen of the restaurant that night echoed far beyond its walls, setting in motion a series of events that would captivate and horrify the small coastal town for years to come. In the days following the shooting, Millhaven found itself thrust into an unwelcome spotlight. News vans lined the streets, reporters eager for any morsel of information about the tragedy that had unfolded in the town's beloved Italian restaurant. The investigation moved quickly, with detectives piecing together the complex web of relationships and motivations that had led to that fateful night. Zara, racked with guilt and exhaustion, provided a full confession, detailing the affair, the blackmail, and the theft. Her cooperation proved crucial in unraveling the full extent of the situation. Lachlan, having survived the initial shooting, clung to life in the intensive care unit of Millhaven General Hospital. As he recovered, he too began to talk, his version of events largely corroborating Zara's account, though colored by his own perspective of victimhood. Enzo, initially held on attempted murder charges, maintained his claim of self-defense. The discovery of the knife near where Lachlan had fallen lent some credence to his story, but the circumstances surrounding the confrontation complicated matters. As the details of the case became public, the town reeled from the revelations. The image of the restaurant as a charming family restaurant was shattered, replaced by lurid tales of adultery and financial crimes. Vivian, devastated by her husband's infidelity and the public humiliation, filed for divorce and resigned from her position on the town council. The employees of the restaurant found themselves suddenly out of work. As the restaurant was closed indefinitely, its future uncertain. Many in the town felt betrayed, their trust in people they had considered pillars of the community irreparably damaged. As the case moved towards trial, plea negotiations began behind the scenes. Prosecutors, aware of the complexities of the case and the potential for a lengthy, sensational trial, were open to deals that would avoid a public spectacle. Cesara, advised by her lawyer and hoping to avoid a harsh sentence, agreed to testify against both Lachlan and Enzo in exchange for leniency. Lachlan, facing charges of extortion and conspiracy, sought a similar arrangement, eager to paint himself as a victim of circumstance rather than an instigator. Enzo, however, remained adamant about his innocence, insisting on his right to a trial. His defense team began to construct a narrative of a hardworking businessman driven to desperate measures by threats and blackmail. As the legal machinery ground forward, the residents of Millhaven were left to grapple with the aftermath of the tragedy. Trust had been broken, reputations shattered, and the very fabric of the community tested. The true cost of the events at the restaurant, it seemed, would be paid not just by the directly involved, but by the entire town. The jury, while sympathetic to the pressures he had faced, couldn't overlook the fact that he had escalated the confrontation by producing a gun. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5. Zara Callahan, in exchange for her testimony and full cooperation, received a suspended sentence and probation for her role in the embezzlement scheme. The judge, taking into account her remorse and the coercion she had faced, opted for leniency. However, her career in the culinary world was effectively over, her reputation irreparably tarnished. Lachlan Thorne, who survived the shooting but was left with permanent injuries, pleaded guilty to extortion and blackmail charges. He received a 5-year prison sentence, with the judge noting the calculated nature of his actions and the devastating consequences they had wrought. The restaurant never reopened its doors. The building stood empty for years, a stark reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls.